Chicago is no stranger to crime, criminals, or murder. Over the years, there have been quite a few serial murderers, infamous gangsters, and corrupt officials that called the Windy City home. In Chicago, from the first week of January 1981 until the first week of January 1983, over 1,500 murders were committed, and over 2,500 rapes were committed. This episode is dedicated to the many women and 2 men who were the victims of the Chicago Ripper crew. They are more than just statistics. They are mothers, sisters, wives, and sons. We don't know the names of all the victims, as the remains of multiple victims have never been found. Due to the graphic nature of this program, listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Ritualistic Podcast. I'm your host Dave, and things are about to get ritualistic.
They use blood in their rituals.
On Monday, June 1st, 1981, police were called to the Brer Rabbit Hotel in the inner western Chicago suburb of Villa Park after a hotel maid had noticed a rancid smell. The maid notified Hank McGinnis, a manager at the hotel, who then went into the nearby field behind the hotel and discovered the decomposing remains of 28-year-old single mother Linda Sutton. Linda's remains were face down, still partially dressed in a sweater with her underwear pulled down to her thighs, hands bound in handcuffs with a cloth gag in her mouth, and $17 rolled up in her socks, and she was badly decomposed. Dr. David Barrett, Director of Pathology at Central DuPage Hospital, found that despite her advanced decomposition, that Linda had only been deceased for approximately 3 days. Both breasts and anterior chest wall had been removed, and several ribs were broken, with nicks in the bones consistent with a sharp object wound. Linda had been abducted on May 23rd as she walked near Wrigley Field on the north side of Chicago and taken to the Brer Rabbit Hotel in order to get out of the van. When she refused, she was pulled out of the van and beaten, and then dragged onto the field behind the motel and held down and raped before being attacked and murdered with a hatchet. Linda lived with her mother Priscilla Sutton and was the mother of Antoine and Shavonna Sutton. On the morning of Saturday, May 15, 1982, 21-year-old Lorraine Lowe Borowski walked a few blocks from her apartment to Remax Realtors for a secretary job. As she arrived at the Elmhurst office around 8:30 a.m., she was abducted. Her boss, Don Steeb, arrived a short time later to find the office locked up and a number of items laying on the ground, including coins, cosmetics, keys and shoes, and later reported Lowe missing. She was taken approximately 10 miles away to the southwestern Chicago suburb of Darien, to an area of the Clarendon Hills Cemetery that was still under development, where she was then beaten and stabbed to death. Laurie's father had continued to pay her rent after she went missing in the hope that she would return home. Her skeletal remains were discovered 5 months later. A neighbor who had seen Laurie on the morning of her abduction identified the clothing and purse found on the body as the same clothing Laurie was wearing on the morning as she walked to work. Professor Frank Orlowski conducted the post-mortem examination of Laurie's remains and noted that the skin covered the front surface of the victim's body, including the lower thoracic region, part of the abdominal region, the right leg, and part of the left leg. The navel and right nipple were present, but the left nipple was not. The skin ended about 2 inches below where the left nipple would have been. Also noted in the examination were 3 wounds in the upper chest, 3 wounds in the back consistent with a knife or ice pick wound, and 2 wounds on the frontal vertebrae, but these could not be determined to be from the same weapon. In addition, it was also found that Laurie's nose had been severely broken. A shop owner had witnessed a reddish-brown coloured van in the parking lot of the real estate office at 7:50 a.m. on the morning of the abduction. Lorraine Ann Borowski was born on the 29th of January 1961 and is the daughter of Raymond and Lorraine Borowski and sister of Raymond, Regina, Marjorie, Mark and Matthew Borowski. Around 1:30 a.m. on Sunday, May 30th, 1982, 30-year-old Shirley Mack was riding with her brother Kent Mack on their way home from the restaurant Ling Ling's, owned by their parents, Lung Fei and Chun Hei Mack, on the northwestern Chicago village of Streamwood. During the ride home, the siblings had an argument and Kent pulled over on the corner of Barrington and Irving Park Roads in Hanover Park to let Shirley out so that the parents and sister, who were travelling close behind, could pick her up and take her the rest of the way. However, her parents did not see Shirley waiting and continued, only to find out when they got home to Lombard Village that Kent had left Shirley waiting. And when they returned to Hanover Park, Shirley was gone. In their police report, they explained that Shirley had no money or identification and spoke limited English. She was wearing a red sweater, black pants and sandals. In the days after, the police would comb the local parks and vacant lots for any trace, but were not able to locate Shirley. It would be 5 months before Shirley's decomposed remains would be found in a construction site in South Barrington, approximately 25 minutes north of Hanover Park, where she was left. Because of the time passed and the badly decomposed remains, the only way to determine how Shirley died was the identification of knife nicks and tags on her bones. Shirley Mack was born in China to father Lung Fei and mother Chun Hei, and was older sister to Kent and Ling. The family migrated from China to the United States in 1976. 2 weeks later, on June 13, 1982, a 23-year-old sex worker named Angel York was abducted. Angel survived the ordeal and her injuries and was able to give her account to police of a red van that had stopped near as she walked. Before she could react, she had been grabbed and handcuffed by some men, who then dragged her into the van, where her right hand was handcuffed to her left foot and then to the van, and she was raped multiple times. Then she was told by the men to cut off her breast with a knife. As she trembled with the knife at her breast, her hand was grabbed by one of the men, who plunged it deep into her breast, and the frenzied man then masturbated into the wound, before covering up the wound with duct tape and pushing her out of the van and speeding away. Angel was found and rushed to hospital, where the doctors were able to save her breast in surgery, and while Angel was recovering, she gave her account to police and could give a good description of the van, but she was unable to give an accurate description of the men. On August 27, 1982, the naked body of 18-year-old sex worker Sandra Delaware was found laying in a large pool of blood by a man collecting cans underneath the Fullerton Avenue Bridge on the north branch of the Chicago River. Sandra's wrists and ankles had been bound with shoelaces, and a ligature was found around her neck, and her left breast had been removed. An autopsy was performed, and it was found that Sandra had been strangled and stabbed in the chest and abdomen, and had wounds on her genitalia which had caused a large amount of the blood loss. Sandra was born on the 18th of October 1963 and is the daughter of Charles Lane and Marjorie Delaware. 31-year-old marketing and sales professional Rose Beck Davis was working late on the evening of September 7, 1982. At 10:30 p.m. she called her husband Darrell Davis to let him know when she would be home. Around 1 a.m. on September 8th, as Rose was walking to her car along North Lakeshore Drive, she was pulled into a van before being attacked with a hatchet, raped and mutilated. Her blood-soaked body was found on the morning of September 8th by garbage collector David Steuben in a stairwell between two buildings on North Lakeshore Drive. An autopsy was performed by Dr. Robert Stein, Chief Medical Examiner of Cook County. Rose had been strangled with a stocking and had a ligature on her arms, face badly beaten with a number of fractures including her nose. A stab wound was found on her lower neck, extensive slash wounds from her armpits, across her breast, and 3 contusions below her navel, and contusions on her back and wrist. A 4-inch long piece of wood had been used to sexually assault Rose so brutally that it had also entered her abdominal cavity. Rose was born on the 13th of May 1951 to father Carl John Beck and mother Grace Thompson. She was the sister to Shirley and the wife of Darrell Davis, whom she married in Bloomington, Illinois in 1975. On October 6, 1982, 28-year-old Rafael Tirado and Alberto Rosario were shot in a drive-by shooting while standing at a telephone box on the corner of North Damon Avenue and West Lemoyne Street in Wicker Park neighborhood of Chicago. Rosario was rushed to hospital, and although he was paralyzed, he had survived the shooting. However, Rafael Tirado died on the scene from head and neck gunshot wounds. Later, on the same day, October 6, 1982, 20-year-old sex worker Beverly Washington was approached by a slim white man with greasy hair and a mustache driving a red van with tinted windows. He seemed nervous and offered her much more money than she was asking. While she thought this was odd, she got in. As Beverly entered the van, the man pointed a gun at her and forced her through a wooden interior door into the back of the van and was told to take off her clothes, which she did. The man handcuffed her and forced her into giving him oral sex, and asked her to take a handful of pills. When she refused, he threatened that if she did not take the pills that he was offering, he would get violent. So she complied, and as her consciousness began to fade in and out, he held a cord to her and she feared she would die. Beverly Washington was raped, mutilated with one breast removed, the other barely still attached to her body, and then dumped near railway tracks and left for dead. A Good Samaritan had found her and called emergency services, and Beverly was rushed to hospital where she was cared for and survived this horrific event. During her recovery, she was interviewed by the police, and she was able to recall details of the slim man with greasy hair and a mustache, and the red van with tinted windows and feathers and a roach clip hanging from the mirror and the wooden interior. She was later able to identify the man in both a photo lineup and in person. On September 11, 1982, Carol Pappas, the wife of Major League Baseball player Milt Pappas, having left the couple's Wheaton home to prepare for the return of their son Steve, Carol went missing. On August 7, 1987, workers were draining a pond and located a white and burgundy 1980 Buick. Inside the Buick was a body that was later identified as Carol Pappas. No signs of foul play were found and was ruled an accidental death. For a long time, it was thought that Carol was possibly one of the victims of the Ripper crew, as she went missing around the time that Lowe, Borowski and Shirley Mack went missing. According to court testimony, an unknown hitchhiker was murdered on the 1st of July 1981. She was picked up from near the intersection of North Avenue and Route 83 in Villa Park. This hitchhiker was given some pills before being taken to a cemetery, where she was pulled out of the car and assaulted with a baseball bat, brutally raped, and had her breast removed and then murdered. In his confession, one of the attackers described how he and another of the crew had picked up a woman and had shot her point blank in the head, and using chains and bowling balls had thrown her body in a river. He believed that this victim had never been found by police. Another victim was an unnamed 35-year-old waitress who had run out of gas and was abducted by the men on February 12, 1982. Her body was later found on an embankment near the road where her car was found, with keys still in the ignition and a purse on the seat. She was found naked and had been raped, tortured, and mutilated with her left breast removed. The media were asked not to report on this fact. According to the book Rivers of Blood, in May 1982, the body of another victim was found, a Hispanic woman wearing an engagement ring who had been raped, strangled, and her body had many bite marks over it. Although her breasts had not been removed, her attacker had masturbated all over her body, and police believe this may have been another victim of the Ripper crew. A number of unnamed sex workers and hitchhikers are believed to have suffered the same fate as these young ladies, and after the confessions and court testimony of the perpetrators, it is believed that there are at least 18 victims of the Chicago Ripper crew. Thank you for listening to part 1 of the Chicago Ripper crew. I've tried to pay respects to the victims and also tell the story as accurately as I can without being salacious. and I've left out some details on purpose, as I wanted this episode to focus on the victims more than the perpetrators. I've included my sources for statistics and court testimony in the show notes. Stay tuned for part 2, where we delve into the twisted minds of the perpetrators, their motivations, rituals, and just how the stories link to another notorious Chicago serial murderer. If you wish to stay up to date with the podcast, please follow us on social media at RitualisticPod on Instagram, at RitualisticP on Twitter, or search for Ritualistic Podcast on Facebook. If you wish to send through constructive feedback or to make a show suggestion, please email ritualisticpod@gmail.com. I'm Dave. This has been Ritualistic Podcast. Stay awesome, stay safe, and see you next time.